In the shadows of the ordinary, where the lines between the mundane and the terrifying blur, 3 tales unfold, each a testament to the horror that lurks within the realm of the conceivable. The first story takes us on a chilling walk home, where a woman's routine journey becomes a harrowing ordeal, shadowed by the persistent steps of a follower whose intentions are as dark as the night enveloping them. In the second narrative, a real estate agent's open house transforms from a showcase of potential to a stage for sinister obsessions as a strange visitor turns the dream of home into a nightmare of invasion and unseen threats. The third tale descends into the heart of urban solitude, where an apartment that promises refuge instead becomes the setting for unexplained disturbances, hinting at a past tragedy that refuses to be forgotten. Each story, grounded in the all-too-real, explores the depths of human fear and the eerie discomfort in knowing that sometimes the most profound horrors are not born of the supernatural, but of the human psyche and the unknown that dwells uncomfortably close to home. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the suburban streets, I began my usual walk home from work. The air was crisp with the onset of autumn, and I wrapped my coat tighter around me, enjoying the peaceful solitude of the evening. The route was familiar, a comforting routine in the quiet neighborhood I called home. But tonight, something felt off. Shortly after I started my walk, I noticed the sound of footsteps behind me. Initially, I dismissed it as another late commuter or an evening jogger. However, as I turned onto Elm Street, a narrow pathway lined with aging trees, the steps seemed to quicken, their echo growing louder, more deliberate. I glanced back, catching sight of a man a short distance away. His presence sent a ripple of unease through me. I tried to convince myself it was coincidence, that he was merely going the same way. Yet something inside urged me to walk faster, and as I did, so did he, maintaining a steady distance behind me. The comforting surroundings now seemed menacing, every shadow a hiding place, every sound a warning. I cursed myself for not charging my phone. It was now just a useless object in my pocket. In an attempt to shake him off, I abruptly veered onto Birch Avenue, hoping the sudden change would deter him. For a moment it seemed to work. The footsteps paused. But then they resumed, closer than before, as if he had sensed my fear and was drawn to it like a predator. Panic took hold, urging me to make decisions I'd never thought I'd have to consider. The street was deserted, the homes dark and silent. I was alone, being followed by someone whose intentions were unknown. My mind raced with terrifying possibilities. Was he waiting for the perfect, isolated moment to approach me? Fueled by fear, I moved faster, my breath short and sharp. Desperate, I cut through a small park, hoping the uneven terrain would slow him down. Yet, when I dared a look back, despair gripped me. He was still there, a menacing figure that seemed to grow larger with every step I took. Finally, I reached my street, a beacon of safety. But as I sprinted towards my house, the unthinkable happened. The man started to chase me, his footsteps no longer a discreet follow, but a clear pursuit. Adrenaline surged, propelling me forward with a speed I didn't know I possessed. The sound of his pursuit was terrifying, a constant reminder that he was gaining on me. I reached my front door in a panic, my keys shaking in my hand. I didn't dare to look back, fearing that seeing him would paralyze me with terror. The key seemed to take an eternity to find its way into the lock, but finally it clicked, and I burst through the door, slamming it shut and locking it behind me. I collapsed against the door, heart pounding, gasping for air. The safety of my home enveloped me, yet the terror of the chase lingered. Through the peephole, I saw nothing but the quiet, empty street, a stark contrast to the nightmare I had just lived through. The police arrived minutes later, but the man was gone, swallowed up by the night. The incident left me with a deep-seated fear, a constant unease that shadows my steps whenever I walk alone. It was a reminder that real-life horrors don't need to be supernatural to terrify. They can be all too human, hiding in the shadows of our everyday lives. The day had started out like any other in my career as a real estate agent. I had prepared for an open house at a charming, secluded property on the outskirts of town. The house, though a bit dated, had an allure with its sprawling garden and rustic charm. I had high hopes for the day, expecting a decent turnout of potential buyers curious about this hidden gem. As the morning gave way to afternoon, a steady stream of visitors toured the property. Couples, families, and individuals wandered through the rooms, their voices echoing with interest and speculation. I answered questions, highlighted features, and handed out brochures, the routine nature of the task allowing my mind to wander slightly. It was during one of these lulls in activity, as I was rearranging some pamphlets on the kitchen counter, that he entered. The man was unremarkable at first glance, dressed casually, but something about him immediately set me on edge. Perhaps it was the intensity of his gaze, which swept over the interior with an unsettling focus, or the way he moved with deliberate, measured steps, as if familiarizing himself with the layout rather than admiring it. I greeted him with a practiced smile, offering information about the property, but he barely acknowledged me. Instead, he began to roam through the house, his inspection thorough, lingering in doorways and peering into closets and corners with an intensity that seemed out of place. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself he was just another potential buyer, perhaps with a keen interest in the structural aspects of the house. But as the minutes ticked by and he remained the sole visitor, a sense of isolation crept over me. The property's secluded location, once a selling point, now felt like a vulnerability. I attempted to engage him in conversation, hoping to glean some insight into his interest in the house. "Are you looking for a home in this area?" I asked, my tone light, attempting to mask my growing discomfort. He paused, his back to me, and for a moment I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, without turning, he said, "Just curious," his voice low and oddly distant. His response did little to ease my nerves. There was a coldness to him, a detachment that felt incongruent with the warmth of the sunny afternoon. I watched him as he made his way through the living room, tracing the mantelpiece with a finger, his attention finally settling on the photographs of the house's owners. "Nice family," he remarked, and there was something in his tone, a barely discernible edge, that sent a shiver down my spine. I found myself wishing for more visitors to arrive, for the comforting presence of others to dispel the tension that hung in the air. But no one came, and the man continued his tour, now upstairs, moving with that same eerie deliberateness. I followed at a distance, my professional demeanor slipping as my instincts screamed that something was wrong. When he reached the master bedroom, he stopped, surveying the room with an inscrutable expression. "It's perfect," he murmured, more to himself than to me. And it was then that I realized he hadn't been inspecting the house with the eyes of a buyer, but of someone calculating much darker possibilities. Panic fluttered in my chest, a bird trapped in a cage. I needed to get out, to escape the oppressive atmosphere that his presence had created. "I think I need to check on something outside," I announced, hoping my voice sounded more assured than I felt. He finally turned to look at me, and in his gaze I saw a flicker of something unnerving. "Of course," he said, his voice smooth, too smooth. "Take your time." I hurried downstairs, my thoughts racing. Once outside, I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed for help. The police answered, their calm assurances a lifeline in the storm of my fear. They promised to send a car immediately, advising me to stay outside and avoid confrontation. I waited at the edge of the property, my eyes fixed on the house, half expecting him to emerge at any moment. But the minutes stretched on, and there was no sign of him. When the police finally arrived, I led them inside, my heart pounding in anticipation of what we might find. But the house was empty. The man had vanished as silently and mysteriously as he had appeared. The officers took my statement, their expressions a mixture of concern and skepticism. They promised to keep an eye on the property and advised me to be cautious. The open house was abandoned, the afternoon's promise shattered by the intrusion of fear. I locked up the house, its charm now overshadowed by the memory of the strange visitor. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being hunted. The man's presence had been a violation, not just of the house, but of my sense of safety. In the days that followed, I was haunted by the experience. I questioned every shadow, every unfamiliar face. The police found no trace of the man, no clue as to his identity or his intentions. The house remained on the market, its solitude now a glaring reminder of the day's events. I realised then that horror doesn't always come in the form of ghosts or monsters. Sometimes it's the unknown intentions of a stranger, the unsettling realisation that safety is an illusion, and that danger can enter our lives with the simple turn of a key. The open house had become a scene from a nightmare, a story of fear and survival in the most ordinary of settings. In the heart of a bustling city, I found myself entangled in a web of horror that unfolded in the least expected of places, my own apartment. It began subtly, a creeping unease that whispered through the walls of my newly rented studio, nestled on the 12th floor of a towering yet unremarkable apartment building. I was drawn to the place for its panoramic views and the promise of solitude amidst urban chaos. The landlord, a gaunt man with weary eyes, had seemed eager to rent it out, glossing over its peculiarities with practiced ease. "It's got character," he had said, a statement I took as charming at the time. The first few nights were uneventful, my sleep undisturbed by anything other than the distant wail of sirens and the occasional roar of traffic. However, as days blurred into weeks, a sense of discomfort began to take root within me, an inexplicable feeling that I was not alone. It started with noises, subtle and easily dismissed as the building settling or the whir of ventilation. But then, the noises grew more distinct, more deliberate. Footsteps in the hallway late at night, a shadow under the door as if someone stood outside waiting. Each time I mustered the courage to look, the hallway was empty, the silence mocking my fear. I tried to rationalize it, to blame the stress of a new job and the adjustment to city life. Yet the unease persisted, growing into a tangible presence that seemed to linger just over my shoulder, always out of sight. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in shades of crimson and gold, I came home to find my apartment door ajar. My heart leapt to my throat, panic seizing me with icy fingers. I had been meticulous about locking it, a habit born of a lifetime of caution. Steeling myself, I pushed the door open, half expecting to find an intruder lurking within. But the apartment was as I had left it, save for a window cracked open, a window I was certain had been closed that morning. The breeze that whispered through it carried a chill that seemed to seep into my bones. I reported the incident to the building management, but their response was lackluster, attributed to my forgetfulness or a maintenance oversight. Yet I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of being targeted by an unseen observer. The incidents escalated, each more invasive than the last. Objects moved from where I had left them, whispers in the dead of night, and once a chilling touch that brushed against my cheek as I drifted between sleep and wakefulness. I was unraveling, my days consumed by a paranoia that shadowed my every step. I avoided going home, spending hours wandering the city or sitting in cafes until they closed. But no matter how late I delayed my return, the dread of what awaited me never diminished. One night, driven by a mix of desperation and defiance, I decided to confront my tormentor. I stayed up, sitting in the darkened living room, a kitchen knife clutched in my hand as my only defense. The hours ticked by, a silent standoff between me and the unseen. Then, just past midnight, the familiar sounds began. Footsteps, soft but unmistakable, approached my door. I held my breath, my grip on the knife tightening. The doorknob turned slowly, a silent testament to the presence on the other side. I braced myself, ready to confront whatever nightmare awaited. But the door swung open to reveal nothing but the empty hallway, the lights flickering in a mocking rhythm. Fueled by a mix of fear and anger, I stormed out, determined to uncover the source of the disturbances. My investigation led me to the apartment directly below mine, where I was met with a revelation that chilled me to the core. The tenant, an elderly woman with a network of wrinkles etching her face, regarded me with a mixture of fear and relief. Through trembling lips, she recounted the story of the previous occupant of my apartment, a young man who had vanished under mysterious circumstances. His disappearance had been sudden, leaving behind a void filled with rumors and speculation. But it was her next words that turned my blood to ice. She claimed that ever since his disappearance, strange occurrences had plagued the building, centered around my apartment. She spoke of sounds in the night, of shadows that moved with a life of their own, and of a pervasive sense of being watched. Her story unraveled the last strands of my resolve. The realization that I had been living in the epicenter of a tragedy, that my home was the stage for a mystery that whispered of dark deeds and unresolved fates, was too much to bear. I left the apartment that night, my belongings a hasty afterthought in my escape. The city, once a labyrinth of possibilities, now felt oppressive, its buildings, and streets imbued with a malevolence that lurked in the unseen corners. My experience had taught me that horror does not always come in the form of ghosts or monsters. Sometimes it is woven into the fabric of our lives, hidden in the mundane and familiar until it reveals itself, leaving us to grapple with the reality that sometimes the true horror is the unknown that dwells among us, silent and unseen. Thanks for watching. To support us, please like and subscribe.